Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Finding Love, our online book talk with author Kristen Casey. My name is Sarah Speltz, and I'm an Associate Director in the Alumni Relations Office here at BU. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Boston University Alumni Association, and it's offered as part of our alumni educational programming. We do hold a lot of programs on campus, but we offer webinars because we want to connect with our alumni around the world. And we have alumni joining us from across the country today. A few of the states where people are listening in include California, Georgia, New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Of course, we also have a lot of alumni listening here in Massachusetts as well. And we also have alumni listening from Canada and the UK today. So thank you guys for joining us. Before I introduce the speaker, just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being hosted on the Zoom online platform. If you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of the presentation, please contact Zoom support. And the number is on your screen. It's 1-888-799-9666. Today's presentation is being recorded and it will be available about a week after the presentation today. So you can view it at bu.edu/alumni. And now let's introduce our speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce Kristen Casey. Kristen is a graduate of the Pardee School of Global Studies. After leaving BU, Kristen took some detours into engineering, international relations, finance, and parenthood before deciding to commit to her stories as a full-time career. She is with us today from her home in Maryland, where she lives with her husband, another BU alum, who she met in a Bay State Road dormitory. I'm actually looking out at Bay State Road right now.
Oh, we missed it.
She also lives with her 2 teenage kids and assorted cats, who I'm secretly hoping will make an appearance during the webinar today. Kristen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Ooh, just gonna go back one. Okay, 1 second here. All right, great. So, Kristen, I have your book here on my little e-reader, and we're going to get to talking about finding love in just a little bit. But first, tell us about you and your experience here at BU, so the other Terriers listening in can sort of get reacquainted with ComAv.
I grew up in Connecticut. But we moved around a little bit when I was sort of middle school age. So by the time I made it back up to Boston, it really felt like coming home to New England. I loved BU. My brother actually he's about 10 years older than I am, and he was a graduate from the engineering school. So I had gotten to visit, in high school and fell in love with it. It was wonderful from start to finish. I loved that there were so many international students there. I loved being in the city. There was so much to do all the time. And I just had such good friends in the dorms and that sort of thing. Obviously some better than others. I married one of them. But yeah, I just, from start to finish, it was wonderful. And particularly once I transferred from engineering to international relations, my life got way easier. Engineering just sort of takes up every hour of your day, and I was working my way through school. So between the job and school, it just kind of takes a lot out of you. So that was a good, healthy switch for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then when you left BU, we already mentioned that you had a very interesting career path and you found your way into writing, but tell us a little bit about what happened when you left BU and how you found your way to the romance novel genre.
So when I first graduated, I stayed in my essentially student job at BU, and I started working full-time in sort of a subset of the finance department. But interestingly, they had me sign a contract that I wouldn't leave before the year was out. I think they were afraid to hire a student and that I would just sort of use it as a jumping off point, which I think a lot of kids would do in my position. But so, you know, during that time, I was dating my husband, and he was down here in Maryland. But once that year was up, I'm thinking, okay, DC, it's the perfect place to use an international relations degree. And there's, you know, I applied at embassies, and I applied, one of the jobs that I almost ended up with was working at the Holocaust Museum, which was brand new at that point. I was just coming out of having several years of taking German in high school and college, so I was pretty proficient, and they needed a lot of help writing the placards on their displays. So that seemed like a perfect mix of all the different things that I had been able to do in school. But what I ended up doing, what I eventually ended up doing, was working in finance at Georgetown, and from there moving to Fannie Mae. It was just I ended up having to I minored in economics because by the time I switched mid-junior year from engineering to international relations, you know, I had a really short window to graduate and finish. So, you know, when you're trying to fill all your credits, the classes nobody wanted that were always available always seemed to be economics classes. It was a good transition into finance. You know, and from there, I ended up having babies and staying home and raising kids. So, you know, never really got to do more with international relations as a career until I started writing. And here I am, I have all these friends from all around the world, and some of them spent time in the Peace Corps, some of them went back to their home countries, and I feel like that kind of melting pot ethos bleeds into a lot of my writing now, so that's great. You know, and then I would say as far as getting to writing as a career, as an end point, that's been my hobby since I was a really little kid. My mother was a teacher, so, you know, I remember begging her to teach me how to write. She would bring worksheets home with the little writing prompts at the top, and that's what I did on summer vacation for fun. I was always a huge reader. My siblings are a lot older than I am, so I was effectively an only child of a working mom. So, you know, I filled a lot of hours with reading and writing. And, you know, once the babies get older and you have bigger chunks of time to fill, some of my peers were beginning to go back to work. And I thought, you know, this is the moment. If I'm going to start this business and have this be a career, there's no time better than now. And that's where we ended up. But novels as a long format, I had never tackled anything that long before. So writing in that kind of story arc was really a new thing for me with a pretty big learning curve.
So I have a couple of questions about when you first started writing, but let's have our listeners do our first poll here, because we have, we should have warned you that we're going to quiz you a little bit, everybody. So, all right. Go ahead and cast your votes here. So our first question is, which of these terms have you heard used in reference to romance novels? And you can go ahead and fill in your answers. And then Kristen will also educate us a little bit. So Kristen, while they're answering this question, can you tell us how long did it take you to write your first novel? Because you said you weren't really used to writing in that long form. So do you remember how long it took you?
The first one was absolutely the longest because I was sort of feeling my way. But I had a leg up in that I have tons of notebooks filled with shorter scenes. Years ago, I read a memoir of an author that I really enjoyed back then. And she talked about any daydream, any regular dream, anything she had that was sort of a fictional nature. She wrote it all down and kept it all in notebooks in case she could use it at some point. And I thought, why am I not doing that? So I actually have tons of notebooks, and a lot of the material from all my books is pulled from there. So I had big chunks of that book sort of pre-written, and they kind of, when I sat down to write it from start to finish, I was more writing linking scenes and sort of massaging the material into a cohesive plot line. I want to say maybe start to finish, not quite sure, maybe like 6 months, which is maybe twice as long as it normally takes me. So that was a long one.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to, that first one, I'm sure,
Yeah.
You had to just sort of get your feet under you. So I'm sharing our poll results here. Kristen, can you see those on your screen too?
I did see it. Trashy's in the lead.
Yes, so it looks like 92% of people have heard the word trashy in relation to romance novels. We also have bodice ripper, mommy porn, poorly written, or that they're anti-feminist. So this is interesting. Do you want to comment on this before we do the next poll?
I think there's a lot to tackle there, as we've talked about. I think a lot of it comes from a place of ignorance. I think that there's definitely a sort of stigma associated with that kind of book, but when you think about why that is, it gets into way more uncomfortable territory, because really, romances aren't any different than any other kind of genre of fiction in terms of, mysteries or crime thrillers, that sort of thing. They're all sort of at the same level, and they have better writers and worse writers. But they are very similar, but you don't hear that kind of talk about the other genres. So then you have to wonder, okay, the thing that distinguishes romances the most is that they're associated with women. They're written by women. They're written for women largely, although that is starting to change as you get more representation in the genre. But you have to wonder why it's so easy to stigmatize something that's sort of prioritizing women's lives, women's wants, women's needs. And then you start to get into a lot of questions about entrenched bias in society, and it becomes a way bigger, more intellectual discussion about why it's so easy to dismiss what's really an industry juggernaut. And when you start to look at the percentages and the numbers and that sort of thing, it's kind of comical that it's so easy to dismiss them as being trashy and meaningless and silly.
Yeah, well, and on that note, we have a second poll question here. So everyone go ahead and fill in your answers there. And Kristen, I have to say, just coming from the perspective of someone who, when I was in college, I majored in English and studied a lot of literature and read a lot of classics and read a lot of things in the canon and all of that. And I still sometimes, when I'm going to the bookstore to choose a new book, I feel a little bit of the English major pressure to choose something that it would be considered literary. And I do enjoy literary fiction very, very much. We had a previous online book talk, about an alum's novel that would be considered literary fiction. But I love reading romance novels too. And also, everyone, I loved Kristen's book, which again, we will talk about. So as people are answering here, this is interesting. Okay, let's share these results. I think everyone has answered. So let's see. Okay, what do we have? I feel like maybe we set people up for what the right answer was. But Kristen, go ahead.
That was sort of a gimme. No, I started out reading a ton of literary fiction too, because that's what you think you're supposed to read. And I enjoy it very much as well. But, you know, and I will even say, as a young mom, the first romance novel that I had picked up in a long, since I was a teenager, was really accidental. It was one of those, there was knitting in the title or something. At the time, I was doing a lot of knitting. And it had a cute cover, and it was, $4. So I kind of picked it up for a vacation read, not knowing what I was going to get into there. But they're very addictive because you realize there's under the huge umbrella that's romance, there's something for everyone. There's, you get into all the paranormal stuff and all the historical stuff. There's a ton of different stories under that roof, and a lot of different, there's different heat levels. There's something literally for everybody. And I feel like once you put your foot in that water, there's really no going back. I'm a huge fan of a happy ending too. That was always my frustration with a lot of women's fiction that I was reading. The Oprah Book Club books, those, they deal with a lot of dicey life situations and family situations. And I was sort of at a point where real life is hard enough. I don't need to then read about it too. And maybe that's just me, but I'm a real fan of having that uplifting ending, and romance. If there's one thing about it, you're going to get that.
Right. And we're going to try not to do any spoilers when we talk about your book, but we can say, folks, there will be some kind of a happy ending, right?
Absolutely. It's guaranteed.
So we put up one more poll question for you all here. I'm curious what you guys think about the number of U.S. residents who read at least one romance a year. So that includes me. Kristen, I'm sure it includes you. That's 2 so far. And our listeners. Okay, we'll give you one more second here to vote. This is interesting. No one's picking the 1 million option.
It's too easy.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Oh, we got a couple more coming in. All right, I'm going to share the results here. Kristen, did they get the right answer?
No.
No.
They did not.
What's the right answer?
More than 70 million. It's a huge, huge pool of readers.
And, I lost my... Are you still there? Okay, great. My computer went a little haywire. I'm just going to pull up my slides again because we have a little bit of information about romance novels that Kristen can share with you guys. There we go. Can you see that, Kristen?
Yep.
Okay, great. And I want everyone to know, too, as Kristen sort of goes through some of these surprising facts about the genre, if you have questions that you would like to ask her, please start sending them in. You can type them in the Q&A box. If you just hover over either the top or bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A box. So just click on there, type in your question, and we'll get to those. But Kristen, tell us a little bit about this. And then I would also like to hear about a little bit more about your experience. So.
It's a billion-dollar industry, obviously. With that many readers, it would have to be. Romance readers are known as being super voracious. A lot of them can consume a book a day. So the earnings are there. When you compare, I know we haven't gotten to this part yet, but when you compare even independent publishers versus traditional publishers, those numbers get even more huge. Romance novels are, almost 90% in ebook form. And I think that gets back into the stigmatization of the industry and that sort of thing. People, even when they sort of love to read them, they often feel like they have to hide them because there's a lot of judgment about it. And in that way, the e-readers are perfect. And things like Kindle Unlimited on Amazon, where you pay that monthly subscription and can read as much as you want. Those are huge for romance readers because they are so voracious. So, right, we talked about how there's a ton of different kinds of romances. So whether you're, you like to read about sort of Regency era things or paranormal shape-shifting things, there's something out there for everybody. And I think that does help make it such a huge industry.
And is there a certain sort of category of the romance genre that you would put yourself in?
I think I'm pretty solidly in contemporary, maybe edging into those sort of rom-com. One comment I get from readers a lot is that some of the subject matter gets a little heavier with family situations and that kind of thing. But I think that they're always surprised that there's a humor element there occasionally too.
Yes.
I think that's probably where my books would hover for sure. And it's true. There is, I think there's this perception of, these wallflowers at home writing these dirty books kind of. But, when you look at the actual writers of romance, they're lawyers, they're doctors, there's people in government, there's a lot of very educated women who are participating in this industry. I think that's a big misconception about who's writing romance.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I learned this from talking to you, Kristen, before we did our webinar. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And again, number 5 with, most of them writing are in stable relationships, sort of. They're not these kind of lonely, like I said, wallflowers. Yeah.
How about this one? You said you've met some people from all over the world, you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very tight-knit community and a very supportive community. There's a lot of author groups, the wonder of social media. There's a lot of author groups on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And it sort of bridges that separation that authors usually have from their readers. With all the bookstagrammers on Instagram, that kind of thing, it's easier to sort of make connections with the reviewers of books, but also with the people reading them and with other authors. And it's a very supportive, very connected community, and that's a great thing. But again, that's something I think that comes out of it being a largely female population. I think we're more used to sort of making those supportive connections with our peers. And that helps.
How about this one, this cutting edge new technology? I'm really curious about this one.
I love this one. And this one actually was surprising to me too when I started digging into it. Romance novelists were some of the earliest adopters of independent publishing and the ebook format. I think, traditional publishing has a lot of barriers to entry. And they have a lot of rigid strictures about whose stories get told. So romance novelists really were right at that cutting edge of that transformation of, adopting the ebook format and adopting independent publishing sort of things and sort of starting their own businesses. And I think that's great because it means there's a lot more representation in romance than you would expect. It's a sort of moving target. It's getting better, but you have a lot more stories getting told with different sexual orientations, different races, different, all kinds of stuff. And that's important to be able to see yourself in the books you're reading. So that's a big one for us.
Let's see, we have 2 more here. I love this one, and we can go back so you can see that because it gets pretty small. But
Yeah, I love number 9. It's true. There's all kinds of courses that you can take because I think there is sort of that huge cross-section of a lot of gender identity sorts of things, a lot of representation things and built-in bias sorts of things that all get a lot more academic and make it really a more interesting topic considering how easily most people kind of can write them off as trashy, meaningless books. And again, yeah, number 10, it's not easy. It's definitely starting your own business and learning about marketing and advertising, and you have all the different ad platforms and that kind of thing. And whether you're independently published or traditionally published, those things are things that authors have to take on for themselves these days. So yeah, it's a tough gig.
Yeah, and we had someone who just wanted to see number 9 one more time, so I'm just going to pull this back up. Let's see. I think we are here. Let's go back. Okay, there we go. We had someone say that they couldn't read this one, so we're just looking at number 9 one more time. But Kristen, so I'm not sure if everyone caught the fact that you do actually, you do a lot of this on your own, and we had talked about how you work with artists for your cover art, but you do a lot of marketing and a lot of editing and all of that on your own.
Yeah.
So how did you make the decision to do that, and why do you do that rather than working with a big publishing company?
I have to say, by the time I decided to publish that first book, the industry had shifted a ton. I never once considered submitting it to an agent or a big 5 publisher because I think just at heart I am a DIY kind of person. I do like to sort of maintain that creative control. I don't like the thought of signing over my rights, sometimes in perpetuity, to someone who is not necessarily going to give it the attention that it needs. I think a traditional publisher is not as nimble in responding to sort of industry trends or that kind of thing. I never once considered going that route. My brother-in-law has a close high school friend who's in the publishing industry in New York, and sort of reached out to him when I was getting ready to do this. And even he was sort of emphatic that it would be silly to go that route. It's sort of, that's where the vanity element comes in. Do you want to have this sort of sign off from an outside entity that you're doing a good job? Or, but at the same time, you're giving up control, you're giving up your rights, and you're giving up income. You have to sort of make that calculation. Are they going to sell way more books for you at a much lower percentage royalty? Or do you get to keep everything that you earn, essentially? And that was really a no-brainer for me. I wanted to have that control over my own work and my own career. And so far, I have no regrets about that whatsoever. Especially, when you talk about romance being such an ebook-based genre, traditional Big 5 publishers own less than a quarter of that market. And that's been in the last 4 or 5 years that sort of switch has gone on. Independent publishers are probably 65% of that market. Big 5 are down at less than 25%. So it's, this is the former engineer in me talking, right? It's a numbers game. I never once considered going that route, and I've been really happy with that so far.
That's great. So how many books have you put out? I know you do series. So if you can talk a little bit about that, that would be great. And then we can talk about the book that I read, which is great.
Good. So there's 6 books in the series that you read. There's 4 full-length novels and then 2 sort of combo novella and short story spin-off books. They just sort of all came out one after another, maybe every 3 months. They all sort of flowed together. And I just had a book come out last week in a new series. So I can usually count on every 3 or 4 months being able to get one from inception to market. This one that just came out was a bit longer. It was, it's a new series, so there's more setup involved, but it also turned out to be twice as long as some of my others. It's in its raw form, it was nearly 500 pages. So just everything took twice as long. But yeah, so that first series has 6, and this one will be a trilogy, so it'll have 3.
That's so exciting. And you get feedback directly from your readers, right? Either on social media or through, some of these e-reading platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. Places like Goodreads and BookBub, and it's always really enthusiastic, and it's great to get that feedback. I think I'm fortunate that so far my feedback has been really positive. I had on one of my books that comes after the one you read, I tried a new sort of marketing thing and did a blog tour, which are kind of, they were really popular for a really long time. And I think they're sort of fading away as sort of a useful marketing tool. But, that was my first experience with getting a really negative feedback from one of the reviewers who had signed up for the tour. A week before she was even supposed to post anything, she was posting how much she hated it and didn't finish it. It was very, wasn't constructive at all. It was really sort of a personal kind of unfortunate thing, which it's hard not to react to that.
Yeah.
But of course, once you look into it, you realize I wasn't her preferred genre at all. I'm still not sure why she signed up for it. I think some reviewers like to look really balanced, so they sign up for a lot of different things instead of just the ones they want to read. Once I learned more about her, the feedback made a little more sense, but that really has been my only negative feedback so far. So I've been really lucky to get mostly positive feedback. And even from people in my community, my daughter's teacher started reading them, that sort of thing. So I've been really lucky in that respect.
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned that sometimes people have very interesting reactions when you tell them what you do. So yeah, what is that like?
There's always the interesting, Christmas party small talk. I try to remember a lot of times it's coming from a place of, I say ignorance in that they just don't know a lot about it and they have sort of these preconceptions. So I figure it's my chance to educate somebody and maybe make it a little more palatable. But yeah, I definitely take my share of digs from people at parties sometimes. It's, my father-in-law, for example, he's 85. So former Navy guy, of course, he thinks this is the funniest thing to make jokes about, and not in a, you're an idiot kind of way, but he just finds it as amusing as possible. And he always wants to know, where are you getting your inspiration from? Because the obvious, punchline is it's his son, right? I just keep trying to emphasize, look, it's fiction. And let's just stick with that. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this book, which I don't know if you can see on the screen, but so because the main character, Meg, she lives in Boston.
Yeah.
And she went to BU. And we're not going to do spoilers, but there is a meet cute that happens in a coffee shop that seems like it's, along Comm Ave, or, I'm right here on Comm Ave. And so I'm thinking, is it pavement? Because that's only 2 blocks away. I'm going to go over there and meet someone later today. So tell us
it's
about
so
that.
funny. This is probably going way back, and I have no idea. I'm sure it's not there anymore, but I used to hang out at a place on Comm Ave called Espresso Royale or something like that. I think that was years ago, and pavement might be where that used to be.
It might be. I don't know. I've been at BU for 5 years, and I think it's always been pavement. But Espresso Royale is a name that sounds familiar. So
yeah, but it's such a, the memories from that time are so visceral. So it was really easy to sort of insert these different places that I remember being in at that age. So it was a really fun book to write in that way. And of course I had to make them from BU because, go BU.
yes, and they go to places all over Boston. She takes the T. She goes to visit her friend who lives in another neighborhood in the Boston area. I think on sort of the first date, they walk through the public garden, which was really fun for me to read. Yeah, and it's so hard to figure out what we might tell people without sort of spoiling it. But I do have one question, which is, did you have to do any research before you wrote this?
So my research, he's British. And
Edward, yes.
What's that?
Edward,
yeah,
the main character.
And so, a lot of my research, of course, being as an American, I had to sort of fill in some of my understanding about how the aristocracy is kind of set up and that kind of thing. I mean, I think we know kind of the canned things that we have from the media from watching, Harry and Meghan, but there were a couple little family related things that I did have to kind of research just to make sure I had it right. And I wasn't just pulling it from, reading too many Regency romances. But I love that genre of romance. I love Regencies and historicals. They're one of my very favorite things. So it was fun to kind of take it and make it contemporary in a way that seems very accessible. And, for me, I feel like reading Meghan Edwards' story, it seems like something that could actually happen to you on Comm Ave. And that makes it fun, I think, to have that kind of, believability factor.
Oh, yeah. I'm hoping it happens to me next time I go to get coffee. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I want to make sure that we give everyone a chance to ask any questions that you guys might have. So please type those in, because otherwise I will keep asking all of the questions that I want to know. But I do want to know, do you have any trouble sort of coming up with ideas for, because if you're going to commit to a trilogy, you have to be really sure about your idea for where it's going to go. And do you know what the trajectory of each of the 3 books in the series will be, or do you just start with sort of the main premise and then tackle the first book and go from there?
So I think, like I said, I have notebooks full of stuff. And when I first started that first trilogy, I knew in a general sense what each of the books was going to be. I think that I didn't think as much then about interconnecting them as much. I think they're more sort of standalones that have kind of overlapping characters a little bit, but there's not a lot of a storyline that goes through the whole series. So I think they're more distinct works. This new series, I knew going in exactly how all 3 books are going to go. So it's far easier to kind of set the seeds for the new books. They're all in there in that book. And I think that they're going to be a lot more interconnected, and there's going to be a lot more flow between them. So I think as I move forward, that kind of thing becomes more automatic to me, thinking that far ahead. But I do have, because I have so much material, I do have sort of that roadmap that goes years into the future, and I know which book gets written next and what it's going to cover. And so I do have sort of that, 10-year plan that's pretty full of stuff right now. I've never had trouble with the ideas at all. They just kind of pour out of me, and I'm really lucky in that respect.
That's amazing. So we have a great question that just came in from our listener, James. He says or asks, how do you avoid and or embrace common stereotypes and cliches in the genre?
It's tough because, here I am, I'm a middle-aged mom in the suburbs, like I recognize that I probably have all kinds of inherent biases. But at the same time, I think because I've been lucky enough to have friends from all over the world and had a full sort of interesting life so far, I can't be that person who just writes about middle-class white people. That's not who I am. That's not what I want to read. And so, then you end up on thin ice sometimes because there's that desire to write about a full cast and a real cast. But I can't always trust that I'm going to get it right. And that's something that romance is. It's a huge conversation in the industry right now. There's a push for a ton more representation, but at the same time, you have to have sensitivity about what your biases that you might not even realize you have. And so people talk a lot about, they'll hire sensitivity readers, that kind of thing. I sometimes will have friends read certain portions if I'm not sure if I'm getting it right. But ultimately, people are people, and we're kind of all the same on the inside in what we want and what we hope for and how love works for us. So in that respect, I feel like I'm fortunate to be working in romance because we're all the same in that respect. And, stereotypes and that kind of thing come in when you start to describe people's appearance or, describe their family situation and that kind of thing. It's easier to kind of tackle once you've got what's going on internally right.
I love that answer. Thank you. We have another question, which leads to a question that I had, which is if you have any advice for people who might want to write themselves. But this question is, how do you get through writer's block moments or even the initial block of getting started? And this person says, I am overwhelmed by this as a novice writer. I can imagine.
Yeah. There's that performance anxiety that comes in all the time. For me, because I write everything down, if I'm stuck on making a scene work, if it just feels clunky or the words aren't coming, a lot of times what I do is go to the notebook and type stuff in. And it's just a mechanical thing. It's making the longhand digital. So it sort of unlocks that block. The more, sometimes it just gets typed exactly the way I wrote it. I often think better with a pen in my hand. There's the typing and the writing longhand come from different parts of your brain. And so sometimes if you're stuck typing, the pen changes everything. It makes it easier for it to flow. And so sometimes, I end up just typing the scene and it comes out exactly the way I wrote it and done, but at least I've made some progress. And I think that can help too, just feeling like you're making progress on a different thing. If I'm really struggling, I get migraines. So I have those days where creatively useless. But those are really good times to sort of switch gears and work on, setting up a new ad or work on some of the business aspects. And at least it's always a step forward on some front. And that's how I get past a lot of that. But I guess, at the beginning, when you're really overwhelmed, you just write everything down, whether you think it's good or not. And you have to kind of release that that internal monologue about, is this good enough for other people to read? I think if you write from a position of, this is just for me and I'm the only person that can see it and is gonna ever see it, you write from a way more authentic place. And first drafts are really for you. It's much easier to sort of edit something that's already on the page. You can't edit it if it's not there. It's like, by the time a book gets into readers' hands, it's like my 7th draft, by the time it's smoothed and edited and proofed and, the bigger readers have gotten hold of it and everything. I think people get hung up right at the beginning because they think this is crap and I couldn't show this to anybody, but all first drafts are junk, so if you get past that, it's not good enough to show anybody and just write what you're thinking and what you're feeling, you end up with something. And once you have that something, you can make it better. And that's I guess the advice I would give to a novice writer, is to release that kind of notion that this has to be good enough to show other people. And the first things never are.
We have a question from Tracy. She wants to know, is there one romance novel or author that really inspires you? And I'm going to add my own question to that, which is, did you ever, before you started writing, read something that you thought, I think I might be able to do this even better? You don't have to tell us who that author is, but yeah. I know you really like the snappy dialogue, which you do really well.
Thanks.
But what do you think?
I have authors that I love to read that I think are super intimidating. I have authors, because they're so good that I feel like there's no way I could ever do that. But this is a tough question. Yeah, I don't know. This is a tough question. I have authors where I read their things and I think, well, I'm definitely better than that. Like I just feel like either, the dialogue is super clunky, which is one of my huge pet peeves. It's so easy to get it right. You just have to read it out loud, essentially. And if you can't read it out loud, there's something wrong with it. But I don't know. This is a tough one.
I mean, fair enough. Okay, well, we still have a few minutes, so if anyone has any last-minute questions, and in the meantime, I'm actually going to pull up this PowerPoint one more time. Bear with me, everybody, because I just want to get to the last screen here so that you guys can have some information about Kristen's website, her social channels where you can connect with her, and also where you can find her books, which is so many places. And there are some websites here that I wasn't actually familiar with until we talked. But Kristen, is there anything you want to let people know about all of this here?
You know what? It's just always so fun to talk about books at all for me. I love to hear what people are reading. I love to hear what people are enjoying. I actually love to review the books that I'm reading. So a lot of times on BookBub, I'll, I put reviews of things that I've just read. I particularly love to review books from less well-known people, because you feel like we're all kind of trying to give each other a hand up, essentially. But yeah, I'd love for people to check out some of the places, because it's just so fun to talk about books for me.
That's great. I mean, it reminds me of earlier when you were talking about what a supportive community the romance writing community is. It sounds like you guys all really are sort of in this together, supporting each other.
It feels like that. Yeah, absolutely. And, the Romance Writers of America is probably the biggest professional association, and they have a huge contest every year that a lot of times members will judge. I think that's shifting. I think there's a problem having people judging a contest that they've entered themselves. But I found some amazing, debut authors through judging that contest that I love to kind of talk about online and that kind of thing. You just wish more people could find them. So yeah, it is fun in that way.
Yes. Well, we hope now everybody here can find your books. And before we leave, Kathleen just asked if you could talk a little bit more about how to self-publish. Do you have any advice about the publishing part of things?
You know what? There are so many groups on Facebook that are great at helping new authors figure a lot of that stuff out, and really good about giving you roadmaps as far as do this first and do that. It is a business that you're starting, so you do have to have that kind of professional platform set up that helps. There's a ton of books like on Amazon about that kind of thing. So I really think that it's easy to kind of find the stuff that will give you a little bit of more of a background before hitting that publish button. But the barrier for entry is very low. There's definitely a financial commitment, to get a professional cover and get it edited and have it be the same standard as what a big 5 publisher would put out. But yeah, I think that all that material is out there, and just sort of start Googling it and looking around, and you're going to find blogs, and you're going to find author groups on Facebook, and you're going to find tons of craft books on Amazon and that kind of thing that will really help you get a better feel for how to get involved.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to take this screen down here. So I have a couple little announcements before we end. But first of all, I want to encourage everyone to go out and find Kristen's book, Finding Love, or any of the other books from that series. Remind me what the series is called.
It's the Second Chances series, which actually is a well-known romance trope, but mine are not. They're a little bit different. It's sort of a spin on what's a pretty well-known trope in romance. So, yeah.
Great. Yes. Well, I recommend it. I actually finished reading the book a couple weeks ago on an airplane. So I was curled up in my seat, getting a little bit misty at the end. So that should be recommendation enough. Yeah. Yes, it was great. So Kristen, is there anything else that you want to say to your readers, your future readers, your BU fellow alumni before I close things out?
No, I thank you so much for participating. It was super fun, and I just as that spokesperson for romance, you just hope that people will give it a try, because there's so much more there than you ever suspect, and it's worth the time, and it's a lot of fun.
That's great. So thank you so much. I really am glad that everyone tuned in today. And Kristen, thank you so much for taking the time. The great thing about webinars is that I'm here at BU, Kristen is at home in Maryland, and we can all just be on the same program together. Speaking of webinars, I have one on Monday. I'm very busy with webinars this month. So we have Dean Sandro Galea of BU School of Public Health, who is going to talk about his book, which is called Well, what we need to talk about when we talk about health. I also have that here. I have all my books. I have to finish this one before Monday. But if you'd like to listen into that, just go to bu.edu/alumni and sign up. But I hope you guys all have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for joining us.